Hey, it's Haakan with Topdon, and today we're going to talk a little bit about something that is a really commonly asked about subject, and that is transmission programming. This is a subject that gets a lot of questions from a lot of users, and a lot of folks have some kind of misconceptions on the topic. There's not a lot of clarity on how this gets accomplished in certain cases, so we're not going to get into too much nitty-gritty detail on any individual transmission, but we are going to talk about where you find the information, what pieces of Topdon hardware you can use to accomplish transmission programming, what are some of the types of learns or resets that have to be conducted during transmission services, and things of that nature. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into the slideshow. As I said, today we're going to talk about transmission programming, coding, and learning. So there's a number of different operations you may have to do when you're working on a transmission on a vehicle. Now there could be any number of different conditions that might trigger the need for these services. Most importantly, we always want to look at our service information in order to determine what the needs are for the specific vehicle and when those specific operations need to be carried out. So if we look at our slide deck here, you can see that there are a number of different types of services that may be required on any electronically controlled automatic transmission today. That would include programming, coding, and resetting or teaching in of learned values. We're also going to talk about the types of automatic transmissions that you're going to run across out in the world here today. We're going to talk a little bit about when these services are required and where you would find the information on how you would know what's required. We're going to talk about coding, characterization, and learned values, and then we're also going to talk about cloning. You will also see that we'll have a discussion about software programming, what exactly that is, and what is required with regards to your Topdon tools specifically. So, let's go ahead and take a look a little bit deeper on this subject. So here are some of the different types of transmissions that you may run across in your day-to-day operations working on vehicles. So on the far left, we have automatic transmissions, which are kind of what we conventionally would perceive as an automatic transmission. So that would just be, what you're kind of used to. Maybe like the first automatic transmissions is what people think of in the purely hydraulic sense before electronic controls came along. So we've got a transverse transmission in the top left here. Just below that, we have a longitudinal transmission, which is a fully automatic. Then, as we move to the center section here, we have a CVT transmission on the top, which I believe is a Nissan CVT. And then on the bottom in the middle, we have a Toyota CVT transmission as well. As we move to the top right, we've got a dual clutch transmission. And then in the bottom right is also a dual clutch transmission. The dual clutch transmissions are effectively like a automatically shifted manual transmission. So you'll find these a lot in Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, and potentially in some other vehicle applications as well. The one in the top right you will also see in Fords, and there are a few other manufacturers that also employ dual clutch transmissions as well. Some of them including Hyundai and Acura. So, the first thing we want to know when we're working on a transmission is what transmission are we working on? So, there's a couple of different strategies you can use to sort out which transmission you are looking at on the vehicle. Many times the transmission will have a sticker or some lettering and numbering on the actual case of the transmission. Again, it may be a sticker or it could be physical lettering like stamped into the casing of the transmission. Either way, you can look around for these first. Sometimes the stickers will be worn off, or perhaps the letters may not be visible depending on if it's mounted inside the vehicle. If that's the case, you are probably going to want some other strategies to identify. So sometimes you can identify the transmission just using your scan tool. Other times you will want to use resources like repairlinkshop.com, where you can put the VIN number of the vehicle in and click on VIN attributes. And then, as you can see in our picture here, right here, it actually tells us which transmission is in this given vehicle. So this is a really nice feature to be able to have access to this. Obviously, this is a little bit more streamlined than having to hunt around on the vehicle where our view of stickers and stampings might be obstructed. So this can be a big time saver. The other resource you can use is PartsLink 24. This one is especially good on European vehicles, but also can be used on other brands in other areas of the world. And most of the time you will find that this will also tell you what kind of transmission is in the vehicle as well. So this one is a Jaguar that has the 8 HP series ZF transmission. So if we go back here, again, here are your resources, RepairLink Shop, and also PartsLink 24. So each of these are available to the public. RepairLink Shop is a free service. You do have to be a professional repair shop to join RepairLink Shop. PartsLink 24 is a subscription-based service, but a very modest fee and obviously great for identification. Sometimes you can also figure out what transmission you have by doing a Google search as well. So just a couple of other thoughts there. So after we've figured out what transmission is in the vehicle, there's a number of other considerations we want to take into account. When you are replacing a transmission, it's really important to take pictures of any kind of stickers you see on the transmission, both the old unit that you may be removing from the vehicle, or perhaps you're leaving in the vehicle and just, maybe replacing the valve body or something like that. You want to make sure you're taking pictures of every sticker you see on the casing and on things like the range switch, because this data that's on the sticker may be something that you have to enter into one of the control units in the vehicle in order to tell the vehicle what specific characteristic the transmission has. So again, just a simple tip when we're doing any transmission service, make sure you are taking pictures of every sticker you see before you proceed any further with transmission service. So just another tip here that's really important to keep in mind. So this is a very long list. Take some time to read through this. This is very important that you understand all of these points, but I'll do my best to summarize these for you so you can understand. Some vehicle manufacturers are going to use some of these terms somewhat interchangeably. Coding, programming, sometimes they're going to get used in a somewhat interchangeable fashion. So you might see something like program the transmission characteristics to the transmission control unit. Now, in many respects, that's really more like coding, because all you're doing is punching in a sequence of numbers to give the transmission control unit identity information or transmission solenoid flow characteristics. I would usually define programming more as pushing physical software into a control unit. So again, sometimes you'll see these terms used somewhat interchangeably. In the general sense, again, I like to look at the coding conversation more as we are providing some sort of identification specifics to the control unit that's in charge of the transmission behavior. So that would be either the powertrain control module, if it's a ECM and TCM integrated into one, the transmission control unit, if it is a standalone, or a mechatronics unit, which is still effectively a transmission control unit. But again, coding would be basically giving that module in charge of shifting some information about how it's going to shift the transmission and modulate the flow characteristics of the solenoids that are installed. There may be additional characteristics that have to be programmed. These are just some examples. Now, learning, adaptation, and relearning. This is something that gets done on a lot of different transmissions depending on the services that are being conducted. There may be a number of different relearns that have to be performed depending on the vehicle manufacturer. Now again, you're probably asking yourself, well, how do I know what's needed? Where do I find this information? The first place to start if you're looking for this information is always going to your factory service manual for the vehicle. Most manufacturers tend to define or specify which of these services are required and under which conditions. We're going to give you some examples of this just so you can get a better feel and understand it better. So, remember, each one of these procedures needs to be performed as defined by the service manual. We always want to follow the instructions provided by the manufacturer in order to achieve proper shifting quality and longevity for the transmission when we do a repair. You do see here in the relearn section here I have mentioning of a number of different possible relearns. Again, anything related to engagement of park, reverse, neutral, drive. That's important for the transmission to learn those shift positions from the shifter and modulate its behavior based on the shift position. So again, it's really crucial we understand when these have to be performed and that we remember to perform them. So here are some examples of when you might see these types of procedures triggered or needed depending on each individual vehicle. Again, we always want to look at service information in order to be certain what is required for the given vehicle. Typical component replacements that will require or likely require these types of services would include things like replacement of individual transmission solenoids, valve bodies, transmission control modules, mechatronics units, or replacement of the entire assembly of the transmission, potentially a wiring repair for anything transmission related, possibly a torque converter. Anything and everything related to these could potentially trigger the need for some form of relearning or learning process for the transmission. Now, it's also important to remember that if you remedy something like a major misfire, it may also be necessary to relearn some of these features on the transmission as well, because a strong drivability fault can create shifting problems for the transmission. In other words, the transmission has learned bad information, and once it has learned bad information, it tends to make worse decisions about when to shift and how to shift. So it's really important that we take the time to understand that a relearn may be necessary after we do replacement of any of these components or correction of a substantial drivability fault. So again, how do we know what's required depending on this specific vehicle? Again, we always want to start with the factory service information from the vehicle manufacturer. Now, there's plenty of aftermarket resources as well. You would like to think that the manufacturer always provides these procedures in detail right in the service manual. Well, sometimes they do not. Sometimes this information gets covered in technical service bulletins. Nissan is a manufacturer that is well known for publishing transmission-related procedures for programming within technical service bulletins instead of publishing them in service information in the same level of detail. So just keep this in mind because, again, this is a consideration you want to bear in mind when you are hunting for the information on your vehicle. It's also important to remember that where they put the information in the service manual can vary depending on the vehicle manufacturer. I have always found it fairly reliable to look at the replacement procedure for the transmission assembly, and most of the time that will give you kind of the overall map of what different types of relearns or programming scenarios might be required of the specific vehicle, because again, replacement of the entire assembly is by far the most extreme repair out of all that are possible, right? So just something to keep in mind there if you're trying to imagine where you would start in the service manual to find the information. Now, there are also a number of different aftermarket publications, as you can see I have listed here on the last bullet point. Many of these various transmission publications have a number of great articles that tell you about some of these different procedures that are required. They have information on common problems. They have information on relearns. They have information on programming. They have information on technical service bulletins that may apply. But there's a great deal of information on many of these publications. So if, for instance, you have, let's say, a 4L60 transmission, and you are curious about something related to relearns or resets on that transmission, you could simply search 4L60 and ATRA, A-T-R-A, on Google, and you would likely find a number of articles related to that transmission that may include things related to resets, programming, common issues, and things of that nature. So again, there are many strategies to find the information on what is required for your vehicle. Always start with that service information as your first point. look at all relevant technical service bulletins as section or option 2, and check the aftermarket publication of other publications I'm not aware of, but again, these are just some places where you can start. So you're wondering, okay, what do the procedures look like when I find them? Well, here's an example. This happens to be from a GM 9T45 and 9T50 out of a 2018 Chevrolet Equinox. This procedure is pulled out of service information, and you can see the transmission procedure contains information specifically pertaining to what has to be performed after the transmission has been replaced or serviced. So you can see number 23 here, if a new TCM has been installed, the new module has to be reprogrammed. Makes sense, right? Here are some other information that has to be performed. You see here in the different colored text, adaptive values learned procedure must be performed when one of the following repairs has been made to the vehicle. Now we see a little bullet point list. Internal service or overhaul, valve body repair or replacement, control solenoid valve body or valve assembly replacement, or TCM software calibration update. And of course, replacing the TCM, right? And of course, you also see any service in response to a shift quality concern. So remember, a drivability fault could also cause a shift quality concern. So just one more thing to keep in mind. But we can see here that the manufacturer does a pretty good job of explaining to us when we might need to be performing some of these specific procedures, right? So here is an example of a Nissan Technical Service Bulletin outlining CVT procedures on a specific group of models. So you can hit this code with your phone, and then you'll be able to look at the entire Technical Service Bulletin. Of course, you can find a number of Technical Service Bulletins in whatever service information resource that you subscribe to, or if you purchase access to an aftermarket resource that holds all of the Technical Service Bulletins. You can also Google search for Technical Service Bulletins in a lot of situations and find a large number of them that way as well. So this is just an example you'll be able to look at pertaining to Nissan, and you'll see that the bulletin is highly detailed, including giving details about when programming is required, how it is accomplished, and things of that nature. Here's an example of a Ford. This is the Ford dual clutch transmission DPS6. So this particular transmission has a pretty long procedure explaining all of the different information that has to be carried out. They tell you exactly what you have to do. Now, of course, all the manufacturers write their directions with the presumption that you are using the factory scan tool. So the procedure may look a little bit different when you are using your Topdon scan tool to perform these procedures, but if we are performing a relearn procedure, the workflow will look very similar on the scan tool itself. This is just a continuation of the procedure on the Ford dual clutch transmission. Here's a little example of what you can see happening on the workflow screen as we are performing this procedure using the Topdon scan tool. This was done with a Phoenix Smart, although the workflow will look very much the same on a Max, an Elite, a Light 2, and also on a Phoenix Remote. So again, workflow will look very similar regardless which one of the Pro Series tools you are using. You can see here that it's only partway through the procedure on this screen, and we could reference all of the steps back in the written information from Ford in order to figure out what total number of steps have to take place before the transmission control unit is happy and ready to resume normal operation again. Anyhow, just wanted to show you what the Relearn Steps screen looks like as it is going through the process. Here is an example of a Ford Escape where you can see in the Special Functions menu what types of transmission functions the scan tool provides. Now, anytime we are working on any vehicle, the normal place where you will usually find transmission service related procedures is inside whatever module is in charge of shifting. So if that is the powertrain control module, then we would go into the topology menu on one of our Pro Series tools, go into the section where it shows the transmission control unit or the powertrain control unit, depending on what style vehicle it is. In this Ford Escape, all of the shifting is controlled by the powertrain control module. So we go inside the powertrain control module, then we go inside special functions. And inside special functions, you can see that we have a large list of related transmission service procedures. Now, some of these are used more for diagnostic purposes, like halting the transmission adaptive learning or stopping the use of adaptive learning or resuming the use of adaptive learning. But you can see that the two that are going to be used likely for service procedures would be clearing the transmission adaptive tables. So that would be erasing all of the learned data for the transmission shifting profile, and then the transmission solenoid body ID. This is a sticker that resides on the transmission where we have to enter in some numbers off of that in order to tell the transmission the flow characteristics of the transmission solenoids so the transmission can accurately optimize the shifting profile for the transmission. If you do not program this solenoid body ID into the vehicle, you may have a check engine light, you will likely have shifting concerns, and more seriously, it may shorten the life of the transmission. And this has everything to do with the ability of the vehicle to properly control and modulate the shifting procedure. So again, just something really important to keep in mind when we are doing a service procedure. We have to understand the stakes are serious. We have to make sure we're carrying out the appropriate operations. Otherwise, it is possible we can do severe damage to the transmission. So here is an example. We can see some other procedures. This is on a transmission control module. And I just wanted to point out that sometimes when we are looking at the scan tool, the value resets may be labeled slightly differently depending on what the vehicle has for equipment and also depending on scan tool translation languages, right? The aftermarket scan tool, like your Topdon, does the best to write it exactly as the manufacturer wrote it, but sometimes the procedures will be worded slightly differently. So if we look at what we have as an option here, CVT oil pressure learning value reset, that seems like something that would likely have to be carried out after we replace a CVT transmission, right? That makes sense. So if we have replaced the CVT transmission on this Honda, this looks like a procedure we would want to carry out. Now you see Honda also calling out auxiliary transmission fluid pump air bleed. Now this vehicle did not have automatic start-stop, so there is no function available because it's not equipped with that particular equipment. The TCM reset would likely qualify as the same type of operation as we see listed on the scan tool, right? It's a learning value reset, something that the transmission has to learn. So if we put a new TCM in this vehicle, we would need to learn the new values to the new TCM. If we replaced the CVT transmission assembly, we would have to learn the new values to the TCM, correct? Of course. So just wanted to point that out, that again, sometimes the wording of the functions may be slightly different depending on the vehicle application in terms of versus your service information. So now we'll talk about programming or flashing. We talked a little bit about the relearn procedures and learned value adaptations and things like that. So let's look a little bit more at the programming or flashing. Now, this is a widely variable subject, and it's going to be different for each vehicle manufacturer as well as each transmission manufacturer. Now, this is a bit of a surprise to some people, but in a large number of vehicle applications, the transmission that's in the vehicle comes from another supplier, not from the manufacturer of the vehicle. A great example would be Volkswagen Audi frequently buys their transmissions from ZF Transmission. So most of the time when you look at a Volkswagen Audi vehicle and you go find that identification plate on the transmission, you may see some additional identification marks that say ZF on them as well. And that is because ZF has built the transmission for Volkswagen Audi. Now, when we're talking about programming, excuse me, we can see that there is a large number of different possibilities for how we get the programming into the transmission control module or powertrain control module. Now, in North America, Canada, USA, and also in Australia, there is something referred to as J2534. This is essentially a protocol that is supported by the vehicle manufacturers in certain situations or scenarios that allows aftermarket shops to access some version of programming software from the vehicle manufacturer in order to accomplish reprogramming and programming of control modules on vehicles using an aftermarket device. Now, Topdon offers one tool that is capable of doing J2534 currently, and that is the MDCI that comes with the Phoenix Smart and Phoenix Max. There is another tool coming in the very near future, which we'll show you some pictures of here, called the R-Link, and that is also a J2534. Now, it's important to remember, again, J2534 may not be supported in your region of the world, which means your vehicle manufacturer may not provide this form of programming software to you in order to accomplish these programming functions. So check with the vehicle manufacturers in your jurisdiction to determine whether or not this protocol is supported and if there is specific software available to assist you in doing this type of programming. Now remember, there are two types of programming with regards to interfaces like this. There is J2534 programming, which again is an aftermarket geared solution provided by the vehicle manufacturer. And then there is programming with the factory interface, so such as a Nissan VI3, a GM MDI2, a Ford VCM3. These are all factory interfaces and work exactly as the hardware the dealer has because they are the same as what the dealer has. In some countries, that is what you will have to purchase in order to accomplish programming. In some countries, you will be able to use a J2534 compliant device like the MDCI with your Phoenix Max or Phoenix Smart, or the R-Link in the future. Now, if you're not sure where to find the software to do J2534, in the US, Canada, and Australia, you can usually visit oemonestop.com. Also nastf.org, nastf.org. And on these websites, you can find links to the vehicle manufacturer websites that then have information on where the J2534 supported programming applications live. Here's just a couple more notes on J2534. Again, it's really important to understand these points because when you are trying to do programming, you really want to make sure that you understand the limitations of the software itself as well as the computer you're installing the software onto. Many of the OEM softwares, including the J2534 softwares, cannot live on the same hard drive partition. They will interfere with each other. So if you are trying to do programming and you have Ford and Volkswagen on the same hard drive partition, there is a high likelihood that there will be an issue and you will not be able to conduct programming on either Ford or Volkswagen because the drivers may interfere with each other and the physical software may interfere with each other. So you might want to research. There are companies that provide custom-built laptops for programming and things of this nature. Customized, solutions-oriented laptops built for exactly this purpose. And that is definitely something you'd want to research because otherwise you will run into problems trying to program. It's also important to remember each vehicle manufacturer sets forth specific computer hardware requirements. So what Volkswagen says you have to do programming is going to be different than what General Motors or Ford or Fiat Chrysler or any other vehicle manufacturer says you have to run their software. So again, very important to understand that you know the hardware requirements for each vehicle manufacturer before you purchase a laptop. Make sure you're purchasing a laptop that is compliant with all of the vehicle manufacturer's hardware requirements. It's also important to remember that as of the very beginning of 2024, most vehicle manufacturers are still preferring that you run Windows 10 Pro. Most vehicle manufacturers have not moved to Windows 11 at this time. Now again, keep in mind, this video is being made just at the beginning of 2024, so that may change as the year progresses. So here's some other things we want to talk about when we're looking at doing programming. It's really crucial that we understand before we do any programming, relearns, resets, coding, or anything of this nature that would be carried out with the key on and the engine off, we need to make sure we are using a stable power supply charger. Now, an example of this would obviously be your Topdon Tornado 90,000. This particular tool can put out up to 90 amps and hold the voltage steady for extended periods of time. Now, why does this matter? If the voltage happens to change rapidly during a programming, coding, or learning event, it is possible that you can corrupt the software inside the control module to the point where it will have to be replaced. So we do not want to do that because, of course, control modules are sometimes expensive, sometimes they're not available anymore. So we definitely want to make sure we're taking all precautionary measures before we do any coding, programming, or learning. So it's really important that we keep that in mind. Now, we want to make sure that we charge the battery on the vehicle before we undergo any programming or coding or learning. We want to test the battery with a load device. Now that could be with the engine, or we could be testing it using a carbon pile load tester. But we want to make sure that that battery is good and tests okay and healthy before we proceed with doing any coding, learning, or programming. Then, after we've charged the battery, we hook up our T90,000. We set the voltage to something reasonable, which the alternator would normally put out. So let's say 13.5 is often a very reasonable number. And then we set the amperage limit. And of course, this has a maximum amperage output of 90 amps. It is important to keep in mind that some European vehicles like BMW, F, and G chassis vehicles may require a power supply that puts out more than 90 amps. So you'll want to keep your eyes peeled because Topdon has a 120 amp power supply coming for those types of vehicles. Do your research, do some Google searching, ask around. There are, again, a few very new European vehicles that have high current requirements when doing programming, so make sure that you are using the appropriate power supply. The T90,000 is appropriate for most vehicles, but again, on certain European vehicles, it does not have enough current output to meet the demands of the vehicle during a programming event. So here's some hardware that does work with the J2534. Remember I said we would talk about this a little bit more. So the MDCI that comes with your Phoenix Max or Phoenix Smart can be used for J2534 programming with most vehicle manufacturers. And then Topdon has a new standalone J2534 coming sometime in 2024 most likely, which is called the R-Link. This is a J2534 compliant device that can be used with many vehicle manufacturers' software to perform programming events on vehicles. So again, keep your eyes open for that. That's coming in 2024 most likely. So if you're looking for the drivers for the MDCI that goes with the Phoenix Max or the Phoenix Smart, you can try both of these links. Those drivers get installed on your PC before you install the vehicle manufacturer software. You also need to make sure that you plug your MDCI into the wall and power it up, and also plug it into Ethernet directly to your router. Now, why are we doing this? Because the MDCI will also download additional updates for the hardware via this particular route. So you can hit these QR codes on the previous slide here for the drivers, and you can hit this code here for a video on how to perform the update process on the MDCI related to plugging it into Ethernet and plugging it into a power supply. So again, both of these steps need to be done before we try to do J2534 programming with our Phoenix MDCI. So again, just some very important notes we want to keep in mind before we try to do programming with our Phoenix MDCI. Now remember, there's one other option that may be available depending on the vehicle manufacturer. On all of the Pro Series Topdon tools, there is something we refer to as cloud-based programming. Now, which vehicle brands are supported depends on the tool. You can look in the menus to figure this out, and we'll show you what the menus look like so you know where to look for this. We do not have the files for every vehicle or for every module. However, it's a good idea to check the database because this can be a big time saver over using the J2534 or the OEM interface and OEM software. Remember, not comprehensive, right? The database for all of these files is not comprehensive. It's a very good value because, of course, you may be able to perform these functions without having to get out your laptop or download a bunch of updates on another tool or things of that nature. But, again, the files may or may not live on the cloud database. Now, the other thing that's an advantage of the cloud-based programming is sometimes you are able to selectively reprogram or program a module where the vehicle manufacturer may force you to program that module in a group or a sequence. What does this mean? Well, some BMWs like the F and G chassis frequently will force you to program the entire vehicle. These programming events can reach as high as 8 hours, which of course is a very long time to undergo a programming event. So it's really nice if maybe you don't have to conduct that specific update. Instead, you can just program one individual module at a time. Now, it's also good to remember some updates may be driven by TSB for each vehicle manufacturer. The cloud-based programming may not have the TSB update files that the vehicle manufacturer is requesting or recommending. You can always check, but just something to keep in mind. So if you're looking, how do I access the cloud-based programming? The workflow is very similar depending on which tool you have, but usually if you click on the gear in the top right corner or the user info button in the bottom right, and then we go to online programming. Once we get to the menus, we will see a list of the vehicle brands that are supported by your specific tool. Remember, there is some overlap here, so Mercedes-Benz will likely contain programming files for smart cars as well as sprinters. So just a little note there about coverage. So now we want to talk a little bit about cloning. Sometimes cloning is going to be necessary on various vehicle applications, and this can be for a variety of reasons. Some vehicle manufacturers physically block the use of used control modules. This may include transmission control modules or mechatronics units in the dual clutch transmission applications. We may also see that the module manufacturer builds in some sort of encryption or algorithm that also prevents this type of used module installation. Now, cloning in many situations can bypass or defeat this measure. The goal of the cloning is simply to restore the vehicle back to normal function and operation. Sometimes modules are not available brand new anymore from the vehicle manufacturer, and the vehicle is otherwise in a good state of repair, and the customer wants to return the vehicle to service. This is where we have to explore cloning options. So the Topdon T-Ninja box, which we will talk about a little bit more here in the next couple of slides, actually provides the option for cloning on a number of applications. Now, like I said, General Motors blocks the use of used control modules on a number of applications, and we will actually show you the link to the technical service bulletin that talks about that. So they're not making it any secret. They do want you to be aware of this. But again, remember, some of these vehicles, the modules are no longer available from the manufacturer of the vehicle. So we would need to clone a used module in order to ensure the vehicle is still able to stay on the road. It's also important to keep in mind that in many of these situations, this module may contain some sort of anti-theft data. So in the ZF transmissions, for instance, they are frequently part of the immobilizer function chain on the vehicle. This means that they contain or store identity or security related information inside their control modules. Basically, when you install a new control, or a used control module into the vehicle, it will contain different security or identity information than the vehicle it's being installed into. If we do not clone and replace that information in the used module with the data from the original vehicle or original module, the car will not start in many situations because it believes that there is an unauthorized or invader in the vehicle. Hopefully that makes some sense. But again, this is one of the reasons why cloning has become necessary in a number of different situations. There are also situations where the software from the vehicle manufacturer may be broken and you may not be able to program a brand new module to the vehicle. So in those situations, again, another situation where we may need access to cloning technology in order to keep the vehicle on the road in service. So this is just an example on General Motors. So if you look at the TSB on the QR code here, it outlines a number of vehicles that you cannot use used control modules in. So again, really useful information, and the manufacturer of the vehicle is not making any secret of this. They are trying to make you fully aware. Now, there is some information on the right here that shows you basically how you identify the module on the vehicle. This is just an engine control module, but the service number is what you need to match up on the vehicle module in order to ensure compatibility if you are looking for used modules on General Motors. Now, this is going to vary as far as what you have to match up on each vehicle manufacturer. I just wanted to provide General Motors as an example of one scenario. Now, you're wondering, do any of my Topdon tools help me accomplish cloning? And the answer is yes. The Topdon T-Ninja box will give you coverage on a number of different modules for cloning. The T-Ninja box has ability to clone a number of transmission control modules on a wide variety of vehicle applications, predominantly General Motors. It's pretty comprehensive on covering General Motors applications where cloning is required. So that would be all of the vehicles that you see covered in that bulletin that we had the QR code for. It doesn't cover every single one of them, but it covers the vast majority of them. The T-Ninja box also covers most of the ZF transmissions that are commonly required for cloning operations when they are replaced, whether that's in a Hyundai or a Volkswagen or a BMW. If it's a ZF transmission, in the majority of cases, the Topdon T-Ninja box will provide this ability for you to clone it. Now, you do have to have a Topdon Professional Series tool, and of course, you do want to always connect everything hardwired. If you look on our YouTube channel, you can watch some videos doing some module cloning with this tool and get a feel for what that looks like. If you are looking to access the cloning software, this is how you get to the information on the tool. Now, the only exception to this would be through Volkswagen Audi. When we are doing any Volkswagen Audi, we want to go through the scan menu up on the top left here instead of the services menu. And that's because you want to go into the vehicle-specific software for Volkswagen Audi, and this simply has to do with some of the security-related measures built into the Volkswagen Audi software. So just something to keep in mind. Once we go into the services menu, IMMOPROG or PROG is the menu we go to. Then, if we're doing a transmission cloning, we go into gearbox, and then you choose by vehicle manufacturer. And once we get in here, we can see the list of transmission control modules that are covered by the T-Ninja box at any given point in time. Now, you will note on the bottom left here, here is the version of software when we made this video. This gets updated very regularly, and there is always new coverage being added to the tool, so make sure that you check your tool for updates on a regular basis. Here's some basic tips on cloning. You just want to keep these in mind when you're going to do any module cloning. We always want to be triple checking all of our connections to the modules. We want to make sure that our pin tension is good on our connectors. We want to make sure we use a high quality USB cable. Check your USB cable that you're using between your MDCI and the T-Ninja Box Y cable. You want to make sure your internet connection is strong. Sometimes you have to have an internet connection to perform a cloning function. You always want to make sure you read any files that you are copying from one module to another, at least 2, if not 3 times, and you want to save them as version 1, 2, and 3, and you also want to double check and make sure that this information is symmetrical. So if you pull the file from the module 2 times, you want to compare the files between each other, and there is a function in the scan tool that lets you do this to verify the files are identical. If you read the data multiple times and the data is identical, you can feel pretty confident that you are in fact reading the data correctly and that it is not corrupted. If you get differences in the files, then you would want to read it a 3rd time and make a comparison to find out, because again, we want to make sure we don't read corrupted data. If you read corrupted data, you write corrupted data. And of course, that will render the used control module that you're going to install useless in many cases. So we really want to avoid that. So these are just some basic tips. Make sure to read over these carefully before you proceed doing any additional services with regards to cloning. You might also want to look into training, as there may be classes available in your given country or state regarding cloning functions. So always make sure you do some looking around for that kind of education. There are a number of different providers who offer these types of classes, and of course this information will make you much better at doing these functions than if you just try to do it on your own. Obviously follow our YouTube channel, as we do post videos on cloning regularly. You can also add an optional power supply like this one I have here in the picture to provide power source to the control module you are cloning, using basically this in addition to your T-Ninja box. I like to use this sometimes because it's easier if you need multiple power sources to the control module. It's a little bit easier to do it with this than maybe the T-Ninja box in certain situations. So just something to keep in mind. Not a requirement, but it can be a useful thing. So just wanted to show you the connections now. The T-Ninja box needs to be hardwired to the control module, and the T-Ninja box needs to be hardwired to your VCI. In this case, we're using the Phoenix MDCI Pro, and then the dongle, or Phoenix MDCI Pro, or whether you're using the VCI from the Phoenix Elite. Make sure you are using a wired connection to the scan tool before you attempt to do any cloning function. Always has to be hardwired, always. And you can see here me talking again. Always has to be hardwired. And now you ask yourself, why? Well, we're reading a lot of data, and remember, any data that travels over a wireless source, regardless of what we're talking about, is at risk for corruption when it is traveling over a wireless connection. When we hardline connect with a USB cable, the chance of corruption goes down dramatically. So again, this is why we want hardwired connections for everything that we are doing with the T-Ninja box. Hey, Haakan with Topdon, and just wanted to thank you for taking the time for watching our video on transmissions. Today we covered quite a bit of information, all of which I hope you found useful and helpful for your ability to correctly, accurately, and efficiently service the transmission on a number of different vehicles. Again, we went through strategies on how to find the information in order to identify the transmission we're working on. We went through how you find the information on what services are required on the transmission, depending on what you've replaced or serviced. We also went through what coding is, what programming is, as well as some of the learned value resets or teach-in processes that have to be carried out on a wide variety of transmissions that are out in the world. Of course, the predominant majority of transmissions you face will be regular automatics, CVTs, and dual clutches. Now, of course, it's 2024, so we may see other types of transmissions in the future. But of course, as of today, those are the primary majority of transmissions you're going to encounter that require some of these services. Hopefully, you have a little bit better grasp on which Topdon tools can help you with this task. Again, any of the Phoenix Professional Series tools are a great solution for relearns, and coding and resets for transmissions. If you're looking to do programming specifically, cloud-based programming again can be accomplished with the Phoenix Professional Series tools in many situations. If you're looking to do J2534 programming, the Phoenix Smart or the Phoenix Max is a great solution, as you can use the dongle or MDCI for J2534 in a wide variety of situations. We will also have the R-Link coming in the very near future here, which will also support J2534. Remember, as always, we want to make sure we're always charging and testing that vehicle 12-volt battery before we proceed with any of these operations. Anything that requires key on, engine off service, we need to make sure that battery has been fully charged and tested before we proceed. We also want to make sure we connect our programming power supply, such as our Topdon Tornado T90000, set that voltage to something reasonable like 13.5, and then proceed with any key on, engine off, coding, programming, or relearn procedures. Always follow the vehicle manufacturer's service information on any procedure that you are performing. That is an absolute necessity. Remember, your Topdon Professional Series tools combined with the Topdon T-Ninja box will allow you to clone a wide variety of transmission control modules where it is necessary and essential to put the vehicle back in service. We appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. We hope you learned something when you watch the video and have a much better grasp on all of these subjects related to transmission programming. Again, coding, programming, and of course, relearn procedures. If you have questions, feel free to comment in the comments section. If you would like to see specific types of videos from our YouTube channel in the future, please send us a message on social media. We're always open to suggestions and ideas. And of course, we appreciate you subscribing, liking, and sharing all of our videos across all of the social media channels in which you interact. So again, I'm Haakan, and thanks again for watching our video today on transmission programming.